Hello and welcome to today's Skype Academy Presents Readiness session on Meeting Migration Service. Before we get into the session, there are a couple of details I'd like to cover first. First, a little bit about me. My name is Nick Smith and I'm a Principal Program Manager with Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft for 9 years in a number of different roles, including customer delivery through Microsoft services, as well as spending the last several years in the product group focused on improving overall customer quality and health. I'm currently a part of the customer experience and deployment team, very specifically the Academy team, where part of my role is to develop and deliver readiness presentations such as today's. A quick disclaimer before we get started. All features and functionalities that we talk about today are subject to change. We do innovate on a constant basis. Where we do make major changes or changes of note, we will re-record this training session. If you're not sure if you're watching the latest session, today's session is being recorded in November 2016. You can go to the link you've seen on the page to get the latest session for Meeting Migration Service. You can also go to the second link at skypeoperationsframework.com/academy to review and watch content from all of our readiness sessions. Today's agenda, we're going to do a bit of a refresher on where meeting information is stored and the problem that we're trying to solve. Once we introduce that, we'll get into the Meeting Migration Service, how to plan and deliver this service based to ensure the best end user experience, and some of the tools that you have to operate this service when going through migrations. Finally, we'll talk about some of the Skype operations framework updates that are coming that support the additional planning and delivery steps required for the Meeting Migration Service. In scope, obviously, we'll be talking about the Meeting Migration Service. I will mention a few times the Meeting Migration Tool, but I will not be going into any depth on that tool nor the user experience. So to start off, meeting information. I just want to detail a little bit about how meetings are scheduled and where that data is stored to help frame the problem that we're trying to solve. When a user schedules a meeting using Outlook and the Skype for Business add-in, what happens is they create meeting information, or sometimes I'll refer to them as coordinates. This information is then sent out to the invitees of the meeting, and that information is also stored on the backend servers. What is important to note is that on those backend servers, we are not storing all of the information. We are storing what the conference key is, what the ID is, so that when people go to join, we know that that meeting is associated with that organizer. And we also store an expiry time. This means that if I have scheduled a meeting for Tuesday, then we know that at a certain time after Tuesday, that meeting will expire and that we no longer have to worry about those coordinates. For recurring meetings, that meeting expiry time is set for after the last occurrence of the meeting, but it's very important to call that out. When the user sends the meeting information out, the organizer is the only one who knows where all that has been sent in terms of the data that we have, and we know where we have to go and send updates to in the event we have to update the coordinates. For each invitee, they will have their own local copy of that meeting join information stored in their mailbox. So where's the problem? What is it that we're trying to solve? Well, there are times in which an admin needs to make a change to the user's configuration. This change could be anything from migrating them from on-premise deployment to online deployment. It could be migrating them between regions within online, in which they would be directed to a new URL to join the meeting. It could be changes such as migrating from an audio conferencing provider to Microsoft's Cloud PSTN conferencing service. The key here is that an admin is making the change on the configuration of what the user uses for conferencing. When the admin makes this change, he changes information on the back end that says, this user will now use a particular service for their conferencing. That means that all the previous meeting information that was sent out is now no longer valid. If you try and click on those links, if you try and dial into that phone number, that meeting information is no longer valid because the user is no longer assigned to that service. So we have to make sure that we update the information from the organizer, as well as the information that all of the meeting invitees have on where to join that meeting. Typically, this happens by the user, either through the meeting migration tool that they previously would have had to run in these scenarios, or in this case, the meeting migration service going into that user's mailbox, updating the meeting coordinates, and sending out updates that get stored both in the server and get sent out to all the invitees of the meeting. And this is the problem that we're really trying to solve within Meeting Migration Service. So what is the Meeting Migration Service? It is an online service that will automatically update those meetings. Now, it updates meetings in the following kind of migration scenarios or enablement scenarios. A user from on-premise is being moved to online. Any user who is going to be part of regionally hosted meetings user migration, that means if I had a user who is migrated or enabled in the US today, and I wanted to migrate their services to Europe to make sure that their services were closer to where they actually were, we'll have that ability releasing soon. So we need to make sure that we update those meeting coordinates during that migration. Also, anything that you have previously enabled for conferencing to cloud PSTN conferencing. This could be from audio conferencing provider to cloud PSTN conferencing. It could be from a user who has not previously had any PSTN conferencing being moved to cloud PSTN conferencing. In all of those scenarios, what will happen is that the migration or the enablement experience will trigger the meeting migration service. The meeting migration service will then go into the organizer's mailbox, and it will look at all those meetings that are scheduled for the future that have not expired. And it will send out a meeting update to all of the invitees to that meeting, telling them that there are new coordinates. This is the same process that would have previously happened with the meeting migration tool, except that it's automated. You don't have to download and install and keep up to date a meeting migration tool on your users' computers. You also don't have to educate users on the process of running that migration tool and when they need to run it in order to get the latest meeting coordinates out to everyone else. It should also reduce on the number of meetings that may not get updated and result in a user experience in which they cannot join the meetings because they still have the old meeting information or coordinates from the previous meeting. So the meeting migration service should really help ease this process, both on users as well as the IT admins, and help increase the reliability of our service, knowing that this process automatically happens on the user's behalf. Typically, this process will start about 10 minutes after the admin operation has happened, and the time in which it takes to execute can really kind of vary based upon the number of users that have been changed and the number of meetings that they have. However, we target that when you are making these changes, we expect the meeting migration service process to finish on all of those users who have been enabled or migrated within 60 minutes. So this is important when you're planning when you're going to be doing the enablement or migration, is you probably want to do it during downtime so that we don't have a lag between the time in which we make the change and when the organizer and meeting invitees receive that update. There are certain requirements for being able to use the meeting migration service. First of all, like I said, the meeting migration service will look at the organizer's Exchange mailbox. In order for us to do this, that Exchange mailbox must be hosted in Office 365. It must also be hosted in the same tenant where we were making that configuration change. There are two Skype for Business scenarios that we support. One, any of the changes I have listed above for when Skype for Business is hosted in Office 365, or when that user is being migrated from an on-premise version of Link Server 2013 or Skype for Business into Office 365. Both of those operations will trigger this service to run and for the meeting updates to be sent out. There are a couple of limitations that you should be aware of for the meeting migration service. First of all, although the meeting migration service is by default set to enabled, there may be times in which you decide that you need to disable the service. Maybe it's because you haven't had time to do the proper planning, or all of your users are already educated on using the meeting migration tool. You have the ability to turn it off. The important thing to note is that any of these operations that you run during the time in which meeting migration service is turned off, it will not be triggered, it will not be sending updates. When you turn the service on, it will then monitor for any of the new changes happening within your environment. You cannot tell it to go and retroactively search users' mailboxes and send meeting updates. So you have to make sure that it's on when you make the change in order to make sure that you get the best experience. As I said, by default, it's on. And so you should be aware of the possible limitations if you make any changes to that. The meeting migration service is not triggered with a couple of different admin changes. One, if you are consuming an existing audio conferencing provider service and you make a change, whether it be a dial-in number or the conference key or dial-in ID, because that is a change within the existing audio conferencing provider service, that does not trigger the meeting migration scenario. Also, the meeting migration service is triggered by events that happen in online. It's plugged into the process of those events happening, which means that if you are a pure on-prem deployment, or you are migrating a user on-prem or making changes to their on-prem environment, we will not trigger the meeting migration service because we don't know about it. And so it's important to understand those distinctions to know when meeting migration service will send those calendar updates versus when you still have to use the old meeting migration tool. Another thing that I want to call out is that if a user is changing their SIP address, which is their IAM address, it could be someone who's changing their first name or they would like to use more of a personalized first name. When they change their address, it will not trigger the meeting migration service. That is another scenario in which you would need to run the meeting migration tool against that user's mailbox to send out the updates. All that process can still happen. It's just a different way in which you have to get the meeting information sent out. There are also a couple of user behaviors that will not be caught with the meeting migration service. So we will catch all meetings that have been scheduled using the Skype for Business meeting add-in with an Outlook or OA or different Skype for Business ways of scheduling the meeting. If you happen to copy and paste what you had from a scheduled meeting and put it into a different calendar invite or a different email, the meeting migration service will not know that that information is there, and those will not get updates. So it's always best practice to make sure that when you schedule Skype for Business meetings, use the add-in for creating and sending the meeting, and you don't copy and paste that information out. A couple of other items to note: that the information that is sent in the update for the meeting will be the meeting information that includes the join link, includes the number that you would call into, includes the PSTN ID that you'd use to specify which meeting you want to get into. All of that information is stored in between a line of dots at the top and a line of dots at the bottom. And that's the information that is automatically generated by the meeting invite. As we go through the process of doing the update, we are going to be updating what is in between that line of dots at the top and the line of dots at the bottom. If you happen to have put any custom content into that says, either the agenda for the meeting or any information that you want that you typed in by yourself in that section of the meeting invite, that will be lost during the update, and that's because we update what's in between those two dots. So very important to call out. Also, if there was an attachment that was sent with the original meeting invite, When we send the update, we do not include the attachment with that update. It's important to know, just in case there's a PowerPoint presentation that you're planning on being shared automatically through a Skype room system with that meeting, you might need to go through and resend that update with that attachment to make sure that everyone still has that latest information. All the scenarios that I mentioned above in the limitations, if it's not covered with the meeting migration service, then you can still run the meeting migration tool locally from the organizer, which will then go in, search their mailbox, find all the same information, send out the same updates, but it will have to be run as that user. So this is an online service. What do we need to do to plan and deliver? Really, it's more about the user experience and the awareness of what scenarios meeting migration service will kick in and what scenarios you have to run the meeting migration tool. So it's important to understand what the end user experience will be. The organizer, who is the one that is having the change made on their account, will see their calendar appointments automatically updated. They don't have to do anything if they've been triggered by the meeting migration service. They will, the updates to their meeting invites will transparently be sent to all of the meeting invites. There's nothing they have to do. What they will see, though, is that when the recipients of that meeting invite get that new meeting invite, if they say accept or decline or tentative or anything that sends a response, the organizer will start getting those responses back from the user, from their invited users. And so they should be educated to know that when this change is made, they should expect to see a number of new accepts or declines for their meetings to roll in. They will not see anything in their sent items showing that the meetings have been sent out and updated. For meeting invitees, these are actually probably the ones that are going to see more of an experience. So whenever an organizer is moved, all meetings that they've been invited to, they will receive an update with the new URLs and dial-in information. Their experience is the exact same as if someone had gone through and manually updated that meeting. So if they had previously accepted the meeting, they'll see the updated meeting coordinates and the option to say no response required. It takes it out of their inbox, makes sure their calendar's updated, they're good to go. However, if they had previously declined that meeting, they will still get a new meeting invite with the new coordinates. And so chances are that they will be going through and declining that meeting again or saying tentative or however they want to respond to that meeting. Now, when you are migrating or enabling a large number of users, chances are that users, whether or not they've been migrated or enabled, will come in the morning and they will see a number of new meeting invites within their inbox because they are working with those people who have had the configuration change. So it's important for the entire user base to understand during periods of migration or new service enablement what to expect and why they might be getting all these different meeting invites so that they understand it's part of an ongoing IT operation. It's not something to be concerned about, and that it's something that they should expect for the time period in which the enablement or migration is happening. And that's really where you want to make sure that you've gone through the change management planning and making sure that people are aware of what's happening and where they can go to have their questions answered. So, what can you do to operate or troubleshoot on this? First of all, it's an online service. There's not much for you to be able to operate on-prem, but we do have some reporting capabilities in there. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, MMS is on by default. When this rolls out in December of 2016, it will be on for the tenant as it gets enabled. So it's important to understand that this is coming and that you might have a change in experience if you're actively going through migration or enablement scenarios. You can turn it off if you want. Again, I would recommend that you leave it on and that you understand the scenarios in which it works, but there are scenarios in which you might have already educated users to use the meeting migration tool, and you want to turn it off. Just be aware that once you're done with that, you want to turn it back on as you update your guidance to make sure that any changes in the future are caught and users have this process automatically take place for them. There are some PowerShell commands that you can use to report process. So when you connect to an online session through PowerShell, you will see a couple new commands. There's a get CS meeting migration status. Here you have a couple different options. If you just run the get meeting migration status, you'll get a whole bunch of information back that is kind of at a user level of what is the state that they're in, when did it kick off, but it doesn't actually tell you the user ID. It's kind of obfuscated within a GUID there. You can run it with a summary only, which is probably what you want to know about is, okay, how many of these users did I process? How many of them triggered the meeting migration service? And what was the effect of that migration service? So when you run a summary only, you can give it a start date and an end date, and that will tell you how many users have been processed. You will see, most likely see, if you were to run this right after doing a migration or enablement, you will see the number of users in a pending state. As I mentioned before, we expect this process to kick off about 10 minutes after the admin change, and that we would expect that for most people, this will be completed within 60 minutes. If you are migrating a large number of users, or they have a large number of scheduled meetings, there is a possibility that this could persist beyond 60 minutes. This is a good command to understand what progress is happening. Do you have people moving from a pending state to succeeded? That will let you know once the process is finished. That way you can notify users, and you can also go through and investigate any failed users. If you do happen to know the SIP address of one of the users and you want to know what their experience was or why there was an error on their account, you can run this get CS meeting migration status command, giving it the identity of the user, and this will give you the information of when it started, when it ended, and if there were any error messages, what that last error message was. That might help point you into a scenario that you can help address and fix, or it could be used when you open up a support ticket to say, hey, there's an error message here. I don't know why it failed. Help me to understand that. So troubleshooting, the same command, get CS media migration status. You can pipe it into a where the state has failed and get a list of all those that failed during that time period. And then that will also give you the last error message where you can find out what was going on if any of them happened to fail. There's also a scenario in which you could have the meeting migration service enabled on the tenant that would still work for all the scenarios that I talked about with regionally hosted meetings, on-prem migrations, but you can turn it off for when setting up cloud PSTN conferencing. And so there is an option in the Get CS Online Dial-In Conferencing Tenant settings where you can get or set, there's a parameter in there called Automatically Migrate User Meetings. By default, that will be on. I am just calling this out in case there is, you enable people for cloud PSTN conferencing and you don't see the updates go out, to go and check this setting to make sure that that is still true. As this is an online service, if you are unable to find out why something failed using the things that I've talked about so far, the next step is to go into the online portal or to use a Premier contract to open up a support ticket for additional troubleshooting. We do have the operations team that is online and a process to engage them for any failures to make sure that we can go through and make sure that we resolve those and get users into a state in which all their meetings have the appropriate coordinates. So very quick, that is what meeting migration service is. That's how you plan for it. That's how you operate it. I do want to talk a little bit about Skype Operations Framework and the updates that we will be shipping as part of our December update. We do want to make sure that everyone who is going through the migration planning or enablement planning are aware of the new service and what it means. And so we have updated a number of activities in both the plan phase and the deliver phase to make sure that we have the guidance about what Mighty Migration Service is, what it is not, and how to use it within Skype Operations Framework. Again, this will be shipping sometime in December. You can check the link at the bottom of this slide that is a link to our Skype Operations Framework blog, which will give you updates whenever we release Skype Operations Framework updates, as well as kind of some release notes telling you what we updated and why. So thank you very much. If you walk away from anything from today's meeting, there are a couple key learnings. One, Meeting Migration Service is a new service to ensure that all scheduled meetings have the latest meeting information when you are migrating users or enabling them for new services. It eliminates the need to run the meeting migration tool where the meeting migration service is supported. And so the end user experience will essentially be the same, except for having to download and run that tool. And that if you do have a migration or enablement scenario that is not supported by meeting migration service, the proper way of getting those meeting invites out is to still run the meeting migration tool. A couple of resources to be aware of moving forward. SkypeOperationsFramework.com. That's where the customer experience and deployment team shares our best practices, our learnings, everything that you need to do to make sure that you have a healthy, well-adopted, quality deployment. The Academy link will take you to all of our trainings, technical readiness, Skype Operations Framework asset readiness. If you have any feedback on the product, go to skypefeedback.com. We do monitor that. We can track any feedback, whether it's related to meeting migration service, any of our readiness training, any of the other features or lack thereof of features in the product that you'd like to see. And then you can also go to skypepreview.com to understand the upcoming features that we have and submit your organization or your tenant to participate in some of the early preview for those features. Also, we do have a community where you can go through, ask questions, review other people's questions, answer questions that you know the answers to. So you can go to that community at https:/aka.ms/softcommunity. We're really trying to drive an active community there. We appreciate everyone's questions, everyone's activeness, everyone's ability to help others of the community to answer questions. That concludes today's readiness presentation on Meeting Migration Service. Thank you very much. We will be monitoring those forums. If you have any feedback on today's presentation, please submit them there. We'll make sure that we get any updates posted. Thank you very much.